Thanks, Anna. It's always nice to hear Perez. So, what do I mean by people like us? I'm at UC Berkeley. I'm technically in academia, and this conference is made largely. There are a lot of academics in here, but we tend to be folks who are sort of in this weird intersection of academia. In academia, this weird intersection of problems in domain science. You'll see posters there about galaxy formation and genomics next to each other. We actually care about our code, and that is something that makes us a little bit different, that we actually care not just about the results and the paper counts, but about the code itself. I like to joke that I belong to the Department of Connective Tissue, and the tenure process in that department is rather difficult. There's a fantastic, much more elaborate blog post that goes into some of these ideas that Jake Vanderplas wrote a while back, and I highly encourage you to have a look at that blog post because Jake did a great job framing these questions. When I come to this conference, I was chatting with Anna a few days ago of DEXI fame, who's here, and we were talking that this conference feels in many ways sort of like home for us, and that's great. I love, this is my 11th, I think, SciPy conference, and that's fantastic, and I really enjoy this community and how this community operates openly and collaboratively, and how many of us, and I've heard this, it's not just me, I've heard this from many, many people say that they actually feel a better intellectual space at conferences like SciPy than they do when they go to their discipline-specific conferences, whether it's AGU or SciM conferences or SFN or whatever it is that you do in your domain. And so the question is, can we change things a little bit? Because I'd like you to raise your hand, for those of you who are in academia, if whoever is above you in the food chain loves that you spend so much time writing code and have a shorter paper list. Okay, there's a few of you, but I know how two of you are employed. And one of you is my employee, so that doesn't count. That you're lost in the middle of a sea of authors and you're neither the lead author nor the senior author in these weird collaborations that come from journals all over the map because you're publishing in PNAS and in Journal of Cognitive Neuroscience and in the Journal of Mathematical Physics and in a microbiology journal, all of that in the same 3 years, and that makes no sense because it sounds like maybe you were faking your CV and you copy-pasted from the wrong people, and that you spend all this time helping random strangers on mailing lists and all these things. So this is what many of us in this room actually do, and I know that one of those who raised their hand just got tenure. I know that another one who I don't see in the room just got tenure doing science, and so things are changing, but they're probably not changing fast enough, and we have lots of battle scars in this community over the last decade of people who have effectively fallen through the cracks, and science really needs people like us, I think. And so about 1.5 years ago, the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation and the Sloan Foundation, the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation, began an initiative where they invited 15 institutions, 15 universities in the United States to compete for the creation of what they called data science environments. Environments where this problem of computation, domain methodology, domain-specific questions and methodological developments at that weird intersection would be addressed as a first-class problem. That competition ran for a while, and I'm cutting a long story short. The University of Washington, NYU, and UC Berkeley were selected to actually then collaborate on writing the final grant proposal together that was funded for 5 years as a collective $38 million initiative that was announced in November of 2013 at the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, with a fair amount of press about this initiative and the choice of these collaboration partners. And it was deliberate that it was announced at the White House. It was deliberate that it was announced with a New York Times well-timed article. All of those working on the project were kept under fairly strict gag orders through the process, because these two foundations have a really interesting model. They don't operate under the constraints of funding bodies like the NIH or the NSF or the Department of Energy or the DoD, et cetera. They're much less bureaucratic, much more lightweight, but they also have a lot less funding, actually. Even though they are rich by foundation standards, they pale in comparison to the aggregate budget of the NIH, the DOE, the DoD, and the NSF and other federal agencies. So the analogy that these foundations use is that they are like tugboats in a harbor. They say, we're the small boats, but we're nimble, and where we go, the big boats, the NIH, the DOE, the NSF, they follow. So we try to point at people, at institutions, and at problems that are genuinely what's needed next, in the hopes that the rest of the big institution of academic science, the combination of funding bodies and universities and bureaucratic processes inside of institutions, will follow our lead in where we point. And so that's why this was done in a slightly unusual way, this bizarre combination of a private competition and a collaborative grant writing. Imagine what it's like to write a grant proposal with 13 PIs in your institution and another similar sized body at 2 other universities. So writing a grant proposal with 40 people. It was interesting. So this is really a weird experiment, and it's a weird experiment. We are genuinely trying to collaborate. So right behind that door in front of me, I took this picture 10 minutes ago. The person on the left is Sarah Stone, and the person on the right is Bill Howe. They are from the UW eScience Institute. And I see Chris Menzel in the room. So Chris Menzel is the program director at the Moore Foundation, who's behind all of this. I didn't even realize that you were going to be here, Chris. Great. So people who are interested in some of this story can talk to Chris. Jake Vanderplas, who's also at UW. The eScience Institute is a sponsor of SciPy, and they are our partner for UC Berkeley in this story. NYU has something kind of similar in spirit. It's called the Center for Data Science that exists. I don't know that there's anyone from the NYU team here. At least I haven't run into anyone. But if you're in the East Coast, if you're in New York City, definitely talk to them. And the program director in New York at the Sloan Foundation, who's sort of Chris's counterpart, is Josh Greenberg, who also funds IPython, funds our open science, and is kind of a friend of this community. The core goals of this initiative were basically to try to support meaningful collaboration between the methodologists, the computational people, and the people with domain-specific questions, and meaningful collaborations that would actually be productive and rewarding to all parties. And that's, as any of you who has done that kind of work probably knows, is really, really hard. To tackle head-on the question of sustainable career paths. And I know that James Hetherington held a BOF yesterday here on this problem. It's a problem dear to all of us, and it's really central to this initiative. What does it mean to have truly multidisciplinary people who are, and people who have a strong emphasis on tools and the building of tools that have broad impact in the middle of the academic career path. And also to build actually tools, to build stuff that works. And we are a community that actually has done that. And I was here 12 years ago when we sounded like the crazies, like the loonies screaming in the desert, and nobody believed we could do this, and we have done it. Philip Guo put out a blog post in the ACM blog yesterday or 2 days ago about how Python is now the most widely used language in introductory computer science across the top 39 US universities. You can quibble with some of the methodological details of how he did that, but by and large the data I think does support that notion. So we actually have done that, but yet I know that there's still a lot to do. So focusing a little bit on how this is happening at Berkeley, we have a broad team. I'm not going to go through everyone's names, but what you can see is that the PI team is spread across multiple disciplines, from the natural sciences to the social sciences to mathematics, computer science, statistics. Our lead PI is Saul Perlmutter, who is a physicist who was awarded the 2011 Nobel Prize for the discovery of the expansion of the universe from type 1a supernovas. And this very, very interdisciplinary team is really trying to work together to build this thing at the heart of the institution, and with the buzzword of data science, which we know is a buzzword, by the way, but we figured that we could spend 5 years debating the buzzword, or just run with the stupid thing and actually try to do interesting work. So that was plan B. But we are trying to work in the middle of really science and ask questions about scientific research. There's a training and industry aspect of these questions that is very, very valuable and very important, and we in no way dismiss it. But this team is sort of focused more on the construction of tools for research and the applications of those tools in domain questions and research. We were lucky to, via some very crafty maneuvers on campus, to be given a space with, that's a map for those of you who don't know UC Berkeley, of the Berkeley campus. And that thing in the middle that is surrounded by a red circle is the Central Campus Library, the Doe Library. This is a building which is in the National Registry of Historic Buildings, which is very, very coveted space, as you can imagine. And the yellow buildings are all the buildings where there were scientists with federal funding doing what could be considered data science. So it was obvious that data science was happening everywhere on campus, and that if you wanted a space for interdisciplinary collaboration, it should be in the center. And somehow we actually managed to get that space as a space that will actually be a home for work that will also include and enhance the work of other institutions on campus. The D-Lab that Dave Clark already mentioned previously, the Simons Institute for the Theory of Computing, which is a new theoretical initiative very well funded by the Simons Foundations. The AMP Lab, where the geniuses behind Spark and Shark and Mesos and all that machinery that you may have heard of. And so these are things that existed on campus, but we were actually given the main campus library, which is right there. And at the bottom left, we are remodeling. We just placed the order for furniture last week. We're remodeling a 5,000 square foot space to really create a home for this kind of collaboration. We're figuring out what the model is going to look like, how people are going to interact. All of this is an experiment, but it's interesting that an institution like Berkeley would let us basically run with the idea of building something in the dead center of the campus. We're beginning to ramp up. We placed the furniture orders last week. The construction is underway. We get the building in about a month. Well, the building is functioning, but the room we're remodeling, we get it in about a month. So we should be kind of physically open for business mid to late August. But we're already open for business in the human sense. Our executive director began work on Monday, officially, and he is a fellow who was the director of the Berkeley Geospatial Information Facility, which is a really interesting outfit that builds tools for GIS around, guess what? NumPy, Pandas, with Django servers, with REST APIs. We found right in the heart of Berkeley, even though we conducted a worldwide open search, and we got candidates, amazing candidates from the Fed, from the Federal Reserve Bank, and from Singapore Research Institutes, and from Ireland, and from all over the world. It turns out that genuinely the best candidate was this fellow on campus who had been building GIS tools around the Python stack for the last 5 years. And so all he had to do was like walk 2 buildings over. And we ran an internal search for data science fellows. These will be folks who will be basically wearing sort of a 2-hat model. People who were on campus and typically postdocs and engineers who had a home department, but who will now be doing 50% of their work at the institute and the other 50% in their home department. About 5 of those folks are very closely kind of aligned with what I would consider this community. And in particular, I want to point out Katie Hoff and Dave Clark, who are both physically here. You've seen Katie running a lot of this conference, and you've probably interacted with her by email at some point, and Dave gave a talk yesterday. So both of them were chosen as 2 of our fellows who will be officially starting in August. Kyle Barbary, I don't think Kyle is here. I've never actually met him in person, but he's one of the core StroPy developers, so I imagine some of you probably know him well. And we have some of the folks who are deeply involved with the software carpentry effort, in addition to 10 others who are sort of in spirit, but a little bit less close to the institution. And so the entire collaboration, in addition to whatever each university is going to do, is structured around the idea of 6 working groups that have PIs from all 3 places. And these working groups are kind of tackling meta questions that have a long arch of 5 years. And we will work on these 6 long-range questions for the next 5 years together. And we've partitioned the people. Each working group has weekly or biweekly phone calls. We've already had a few mini conferences and activities with people from all of them. And these are the 6 topics of the 6 working groups. I don't have time to go into all the details of all of that. This took us a year and a half to put together. But hopefully you will you will feel that these are the kinds of things precisely that we talk about here. Reproducible research was one of the topics of last year's SciPy. Education is one of the main topics of this one. Software, tools, and environments, well, I guess that's what we've been doing for 14 years. Career paths is a question that comes up all the time. And then the questions of ethnography and evaluation in space and culture kind of float in the background of what we do. Zooming in a little bit on software, tools, and environments, I'm the lead for the Berkeley Software Tools Working Group. Bill Howe, that I just mentioned before, is the lead at UW for the corresponding, for the same working group. And we're trying to focus on building tools for open and reproducible data science across languages, across programming languages. It's not just Python. We have domain users who are in different disciplines and who need different tools, and what we want is for them to really have the best possible tools regardless of their language. And we want to find a way to engage a lot of the deep expertise that we don't always successfully engage. I know there are at UC Berkeley amazing people in compiler research and numerical algorithms. We have some of the best numerical analysts in the world, and I've never seen them make contributions to SciPy, or at least very few of them. And so how do we engage that, use the space, the physical space and resources that we have, and we complement with our institutions the open source model that exists. On the reproducible research and open science angle, we're really trying to tackle both the technical aspect of building better tools and the cultural practices, the incentive models, and even the thinking. And Lorena Barba yesterday asked some really interesting questions in this regard in her keynote about the epistemological side of this, because we are a university, right? We are a research institution that needs to think. Science is undergoing an important transition, and we need to think both about the very concrete technical questions with building tools and also about what is happening to science itself and what do these points mean. In education, there are a lot of really hard questions here. Is something different happen? How do we teach computing? Is data science something that has a conceptual core that really is something unique, or is it something that should be simply taught as a skill in each domain? Is this something that is going to require entire new programs? There's a lot of really hard questions, and these obviously intersect with all of the typical mess of your institution. In career paths, again, very nasty questions about criteria for hiring. Do you get new faculty FTEs that are associated with this? How do you promote them? What kinds of positions do you create? Are these new positions? Are there new flavors of promotion and reward in the existing paths? I don't know. I really don't know the answer to a lot of these questions. There's a really well-organized effort to try to think of this as a human process and study it from an ethnographic perspective. And I would encourage you to talk both to Dave Clark and also to Seb Bendhall, who is giving a talk about the SciPy community, and he's a graduate student at UC Berkeley who's working on studying this as an ethnographic question. And I think there's going to be a lot of interesting ideas that will come out of it. We have an industry outreach program. We are in academia, but we know that a lot of these questions, the tools, the data, and a lot of the skill sets are actually in industry, and we want to have a valuable and a productive industry dialogue, though it's clear, as some of the Facebook's little brouhaha in the last week happened, that's a delicate path to walk, and we'll need to figure that out. And so I'm finally going to leave it here, and I have a couple of questions that either for discussion now or if we're out of time over the next few days, if you're interested, I'd like to think about. Is there something called data science in science? As I said, we try to skip the buzzword question just not to get bogged in it, but I think it is a question that merits reflection. Is an entity like BIDS or our corresponding partners at UW and NYU, is this the right intellectual and institutional space for a community such as this one? And how, concretely, can this institute, how can we, as some of the team at the Berkeley Institute, better engage all of you, basically? So I'll leave it at that, and thank you for your attention.